Victor, can you see I turned on? Yes, I can see the captions.
I'm excited. This should be super cool. It's also cool to have to use some of the technology here and debug some of the issues that come with automated transcripts. So this will be fun to explore too.
Hey there, everybody. I am Chris Bogue. This is going to be a different episode today, but I'm very excited about it. Today, I am not going to be talking as much as usual because I'm usually Mr. Gabba Gabba Gabba. But today, it's going to be a conversation between two people who I have learned a lot from. As many of you know, all my content is captioned. I write my captions personally. And some people don't understand, Meryl's dancing. They don't understand why it's such a big deal to me and why I make such a big deal out of captions. And part of it is because the two people I'm going to have a conversation with taught me a lot. Just the real quick background on me, if anybody watching this doesn't know, my name is Chris Bogue. I make mercifully short video content that drives revenue. I make funny videos and I train individuals and sales teams and customer success teams how to get on video. Specifically, I teach the soliloquy, which is just talking to the audience, the way Shakespeare did, the way they did in The Office. That is my secret to content. That is my secret to sales. You break the fourth wall and you look at the audience and you just talk to them simply. So if anyone wants to check me out, I'm at christopherbogue.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guests. So my first guest, his name is Viktor Köves. He is the senior front-end engineer and accessibility specialist at PackBack. PackBack is a curiosity-based, critical thinking-based discussion software. And Viktor taught me a lot about accessibility. He was the reason why when I launched my business, I knew that I had to make everything captioned. So Viktor, why don't you just take a second here, say hi, and please tell our audience where they can find you online.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Chris. What a kind introduction. So yeah, my name is Viktor Köves, Viktorkoves, or as I like to say, all Ks, no Cs. And yeah, I'm a front-end developer and web accessibility specialist at PackBack. And you can find me at viktorkoves.com, again, ViktorKoves, or at twitter.com/Viktor_Köves. And yeah, I've been working in the accessibility space now with my time at PackBack for 4 years. And it's one of the things I'm most passionate about. It's really something that gets me really driven going, and just interacting with the community and lovely folks like Meryl who teach me so much every single day that it's every day I come into work and I learn something new about accessibility, and that's awesome. And it's great to hear how it rubbed off on you, Chris.
Yes, you have an enthusiasm about you that is infectious. I'm so sorry for botching your last name too. It's been a long time since I said your last name, so apologies about that.
No, it's okay. As I tell people, the correct pronunciation of my name is Viktor Köves, but those sounds don't exist in English. So as my parents are very disappointed in me in this, I just give up on having the pronunciation correct. Viktor Köves is totally fine. So
thank you, Viktor. And I'd like to introduce my other guest. So she is a deaf author and business owner and accessibility advocate. She was somebody who really helped me understand how to do captions better when I launched my business. I got in touch with her, our paths crossed somehow, and she gave me some very simple but effective feedback on my captions. And as a deaf person, she was like, hey, this moves too quickly and your audience is probably missing some of the things you're trying to say. And she was so helpful at giving me simple things I could do to make my stuff better. So I am very honored to introduce Meryl Evans. And if you want to introduce yourself and tell the audience where they can find you, we'll have those links in the description as well.
This is Meryl speaking. I have curly hair, shorter length, pale skin, prominent nose, and an accent that you probably noticed. I'm sorry, you can't travel anywhere to find this accent. I was born with it. It's just one of those things that comes with the deafness. And it's like, so you can find me, you see my name right here, and you can find me on meryl.net, and the links to my social media is all there. Chris, thank you for having me, and it's great to meet you, Viktor. I appreciate how wonderful you've been about your feedback, my feedback on your caption, and that you asked for it. Because the amount of time I won't give feedback in that act if it's not positive. Because I never want to put anyone down. The fact that they caption is that's progress. Perfection, with accessibility, it should be progress, not perfection.
Well, thank you. And I'm really glad you make that point. And that's where I want to start today. So there is a purpose for this conversation today. The reason why I have brought Viktor and Meryl together is because captions are for everyone, right? And I have learned from both of you that even if deafness did not exist, we would still want to caption 100% of everything because it makes content better. It will improve your SEO. I know for me, my platform of choice is LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn all the time. And the default options on LinkedIn are sound off, captions on. So if you are making content, you might only have one chance to get through to your audience. And if they don't have sound, they will scroll right past you and they will miss your message. And as we're going to learn today, as we listen to Viktor and Meryl, there are a number of reasons why a person might not have sound. And we need to be thinking about that every time we create content. So we're going to start here. By the way, this conversation has been pre-recorded to make the captions as accessible as possible. If anybody knows of a good live auto captioning service, please DM me because I would like to learn about it. But yeah, first we're going to start with Meryl. Meryl, do you want to take a few minutes to just introduce your background and how you started doing what it is that you do?
This is Meryl speaking. A little background, I have a degree in education and I have always been passionate about it, but I never wanted to be a teacher. I did work in the training department at the Federal Aviation Administration in my first job out of college. I did process management and marketing. Then the next two companies I worked with were telecom companies in the Fortune 500. There, I did mostly process management with writing and marketing. Are you detecting a theme yet? What is writing and marketing, education, have to do with education? Well, writing and marketing is about educating, just in a different way, just not in the classroom. For a long time, I was mainly a writer and a digital marketer. And then almost 3 years ago, I started doing videos about quality caption. Things were slow during those days, and I had the time to create videos. Then I received an invitation to present at a premier digital accessibility conference in 2019. I felt like I had found my place and my people. It felt like home. Why? Because they included me. Feeling invisible is one of the few things I struggle with a lot. And I never felt invisible around the people I met at the conference and thereafter in accessibility roles. After the conference, I went back to my digital marketing work while keeping accessibility in the back of my mind. I got invited to speak at another event as a result of the first one, and it snowballed from there with more speaking engagement. Eventually, I met Thomas Logan of Equal Entry, an accessibility consultancy, who brought me on board to manage the company's marketing. I did more writing, more speaking, more work. Joe Devon, the co-founder of Diamond and Global Accessibility Awareness Day, also brought me on board to his accessibility company. Now I'm an accessibility and marketing consultant. Truly, I do a little bit of everything. I help companies ensure their content is accessible. People hire me to speak at their events or train their employees on why and how to create accessible content, quality caption, and living with a disability. And this is the happiest I've ever been in my career. It's not a job, it's a joy. It keeps me busy And my mind off the fact my youngest just went off to college. Blow off, y'all.
That is so beautiful, Meryl. And yeah, just you saying that you no longer felt invisible. That's something I notice a lot. I notice a lot of people out there feel invisible, but it wasn't until I started learning about accessibility that, yeah, I started realizing that in many cases, people are just left with, they're not able to hear it. They're left out of the experience. And, we can make content that doesn't make people feel invisible. And I'm so happy to hear about the joy this brings you. And yeah, I have noticed that too myself, where it's weirdly joyful. And I never thought captions would be something I could associate with joy or creativity or fun. But I have a lot of fun creating captions, and it's probably because I read your stuff and I follow you. And yeah, you have a real exuberance about you.
Your video cracked me up, Chris. I love the creativity you take with them, and especially that from time to time you'll do some creative stuff with the caption, and I love that, and I appreciate that, because when people see how much fun it is, then they're more willing to give it a try.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I noticed, I'm like, nobody is making jokes for deaf people, so I will throw jokes for deaf people in my captions. And even now I'm playing saxophone. Instead of writing saxophone playing, I'll write squeep bop dee bop dee ba dee boo. And it's more fun as a writer. And I like to think that my deaf fans get to enjoy it. So thank you. I will keep trying to do that. And I want to pivot over to Viktor now, because Viktor does very cool work. He's very exciting work working with higher education. And Viktor, do you want to just take a few minutes and tell us about your background?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So first of all, I think the caveat I like to give, or the introduction, is I did not at any point in my career really make an active decision to pursue accessibility. It really kind of happened to me in a way. And the way that happened is that there was a job opening for PackBack that said front-end developer with a focus on accessibility. I was like, okay, well, I'm a very good front-end developer, and this is the first time I've really heard about accessibility, but I'm a very fast learner. And I responded, I created like a demo page that was extremely accessible. I did a lot of work and read as much as I could very quickly to do a good job with that. And since then, since kind of discovering accessibility in that way, I've been really passionate about it. And I've been writing about it and thinking about it a lot and going to talks. And unfortunately, I love, Meryl, your perspective of not critiquing. I wish I had that wisdom earlier on, because I've put out some articles that are specifically calling out companies for doing a bad job. But I will say, I won't name names. I'll let people check my website. But I will say the one company I did call out, their website actually improved a lot. They never told me if it was because of me, but I'd like to think I played a small part, even if that wasn't necessarily the best way to do that. But day to day, what I really do is I'm a front-end developer, so it's implementing features and doing all those standard engineering tasks, but also training our team on accessibility best practices, working with professional auditors. So we hire an auditing team who does an in-depth accessibility audit, and really making sure that our entire platform is as accessible as it can be. And what's really cool is, as I've grown in my role and as the platform has developed, it started with just fixing the basics, right? Our platform is super inaccessible. How do we get it to, like, people can use it who are deaf, who are blind, who are vision impaired, motor impaired, anything like that. And as it progressed, it really became starting to ratchet that up to like, okay, this is workable, but how do we improve it? And we always took feedback from students super seriously. If a student told us, hey, this isn't working for me, that is our biggest insight. And I think that's one of the biggest learnings I've had with accessibility is it is impossible for me to understand the experience of any person with a specific disability. I just can't. No matter what I do, I will never fully understand that experience. So the best thing I can do is to take the guidance that's out there and make sure that I integrate that, and then to listen and to be really responsive to feedback. Because ultimately, that's, I think, what accessibility is really about. It's about including people and listening to them when they tell you, hey, this doesn't work for me. Because I think there's sometimes that response of, well, I followed WCAG, I followed the checklist. And it's like, well, WCAG's point is to make things accessible. And all of these guidelines are really to make sure that everyone can consume your content and use your product. And so if it's not actually working for people, you're missing the point. And I think that's something that is really exciting about my job. Every single day I get to make sure that students across the country get to use a discussion platform that really works for them. Because unfortunately, education is one of the few spaces where it is legally mandated that you should be accessible, but the bar is just so incredibly low. Like these big name $1 million platforms that I won't name really do just an awful job. And I think it's really cool to be able to raise the bar and say, you know what, we can create a first-class experience for students of all stripes, of all abilities, who have anything and any technology that they're using, and it should work great for them. So yeah, and somehow I managed to also rub that off on Chris, which I think is just fantastic and truly humbling.
Well, thank you, Victor. And I think for me, it was the realization that I can do this. And I started doing video, and I started looking around at companies who were doing video and people whose title was video strategy, content strategy. And I was like, these people don't have captions in their videos. And that's an easy way to set yourself out. If you are trying to do something new with video, do it in a way where everybody who uses video can enjoy it. And, I had to learn about it. But again, Victor taught me a lot. And now I'm going to pivot back to Meryl because I want to talk a little bit. We have a very great opportunity here. Victor and I are not deaf. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, like, as a deaf person, what are some things you wish non-deaf people understood? What kinds of things do you educate people on that they might not immediately be aware of? You have a platform where most of your audience here are, not deaf. So yeah, just let us know, like, what are some things you'd like us to hear?
If I come across a video that isn't obvious right away, whether it has quality caption, and I start watching it to find not the problem, it creates a frustrating experience. And you feel like the video wasted your time. Quality captions matter a great deal. People don't realize quality captions mean more than just accuracy. The best way to get feedback on quality captions is to ask people who depend on them every day. It's a different experience when you depend on them than someone who likes to have them or is a web developer and turns the sound off to test them. So only putting up with it for a few minutes. I have to use them every day, all day. I've had companies where I needed to get information from a video to write something, and they'd have no caption or automatic caption. So I'm having to replay the video or try another tool for automatic caption. Someone who can hear the audio can do it in a couple minutes. What will take me 15, 20, 30 minutes. Every time I run into that situation, I lose respect for the company and will avoid giving them my business. It's not just caption that matter. Communication options matter too. I contacted tech support in a chat. The first thing they asked me was for a callback phone number in case we got disconnected. I explained that I'm deaf and I prefer not to do that because it takes me longer to do phone calls. After that chat, I submitted a suggestion to the company. The next time I contacted the company tech support in chat, they gave me the choice of providing my email or phone number. See what a little bit it makes, and it doesn't cost anything more other than just add 2 more words. Email and email. And companies need to always offer at least 2 modern contact options. The reason I say that is because one company gave me 3 choices. A phone number, okay. A fax machine, and snail mail. Who wants to use snail mail in the day of instant right? Everything instant, right? Only one of those counts, and it's the phone number. And I definitely don't want to use that. Retailers, restaurants, and healthcare practices also need to provide communication options. I had to go through drive-throughs for COVID testing. I could not see the person because the glass was reflecting, and she couldn't understand me. We were talking through the speaker. It was a horrible experience. Why not offer an app or texting as another option for communicating? When I go to the doctor and wait for them to call on me, I look up around the room after they've called somebody's name, and I watch to see if anyone gets up. If not, then I'll assume they called on me and check. So how about texting or using something like a restaurant notification thingamajig? As for companies doing a great job, I say Netflix, Peloton, Microsoft, Nobility with a K, Equal Entry, and Diamond. For disclosure, I work with those last two companies.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bounce back to Viktor here for a moment. And Viktor, could you tell me about any like mistakes you've made, or like you talk about how feedback and listening to the students who had accessibility issues, like that was really helpful to you. So can you tell me about some of the learning that you did along the way, and maybe like a story or two about some of the things where you had to let that feedback affect what you were doing?
So I think in my experience, one of the biggest mistakes that web developers learn is I think there's an evolution that you go through as you learn about accessibility as someone who doesn't personally have an accessibility need, or maybe not the one that you're working towards. And I think when you start, you kind of overcompensate and you build out maybe too much information into the thing that you're looking for. So for example, one of the mistakes people often make with screen readers, which is often, that's one of the more difficult parts of my role as a web developer, is making sure it works with the screen reader, is over communicating. So every link becomes like a paragraph. Everything becomes way longer than it really needs to be. And it's kind of just, I've seen people who are like, oh, I've made every single paragraph tabbable, which for those who don't know what that means, it means that basically every element on a page becomes interactive, which is not the point, but it's kind of a misunderstanding of how the technology is used. And so what happens is, as you speak to people who use that technology, I think often what happens is people who don't have a specific disability underestimate the skill that folks with disabilities have in using their technology. So for example, there was a man who was blind who was in the lobby of a building I was working in, and he was using his iPhone screen reader. And the speed that the screen reader read out was maybe 5 times human speed. I couldn't even get close to comprehending. Like, even if I was trying very hard to eavesdrop on what he was doing on his phone, I just couldn't follow it. And so I think there's this sense that people think that they really need to over communicate and put in more information, but it's often that brevity and succinctness, making sure that you're communicating everything you need to, but that brevity is super important. And I think there's also just times where maybe we miss something or we misunderstand something, and it's really, oh, okay, I thought that this should work this way, but really this is how it works across the web. And having that flexibility to be like, okay, this is what works better for you. This is how you could operate this faster. And sometimes it's getting out of the user's way. So sometimes it's just really making sure that your website does not need to be a solution, in the sense that, like, I see a lot of things of dark modes and like changing contrast and a lot of those things, and those can be helpful. But a lot of times folks have their own tools, and what they really want is your website and your content to get out of the way, to provide your information, but to let them see it and use it and interact with it in the way that's comfortable to them. So as one last example, we were having some issues with students who couldn't understand what parts of our website were links, which ones were interactive. We were pretty confused by that. We thought, okay, well, we use a pretty clear indication. But the reason that the student was having this issue was it was an older gentleman who used a zoom tool and also a custom color palette, where our entire website was black with yellow text. And so the way that we had styled links was completely overwritten, and it wasn't coming through. And we had avoided using underlines on all of our links. And that was a big mistake, because it meant that if someone was changing the color palette, it wouldn't come through. So it's really those things that if you think you You actually don't. That's usually the most common thing I can say is you kind of do your best. You say, okay, let's approach this. Let's think about all the different use cases. Let's test with a bunch of tools. But then ultimately, like Meryl said, like I can simulate what it is like to not see the screen and use a screen reader. Or I can simulate what it's like to not have audio, but I don't have the lived experience. And you also can't erase the knowledge you have of your product. So for example, even if I'm not looking at the screen, I know the PackBack questions interface like the back of my hand. So if something's confusing with a screen reader, it might not confuse me as much as it would confuse an actual user. So it's really listening is like the biggest skill that I think accessibility practitioners have, because it's realizing that you try your best, but sometimes you're just wrong. And you have to accept that and be humbled by the fact that you cannot encompass all experiences. And it's really that listening and that flexibility that is really key.
When Viktor was talking about the screen readers reading really, really fast, it brought up a memory of when Fable Sam Proof, I don't know if I pronounced his last name right, he happened to be blind, and he's a very fast typist and listen to screen readers so fast, it sounds like the mumbling. It's like like on Peanuts, you know, Snoopy, when the adults are talking, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it didn't feel like there was somebody speaking. And so it was really fascinating. And then Netflix and other companies that they're doing captioning really well. Now, I just watched Squid Game, just like everybody else in half the country did. So the captions amazed me. They surprised me, because when I'm watching a show or a movie in a different language than what I speak, usually the captions are not good. They only caption the other language. So anytime they spoke Korean, they were captioning in English. But I've watched stuff where the character will start speaking English. That will not be captioned. So I was missing what they were saying. They were not captioning sound, music, none of that. One time I was watching an award-winning film, foreign film, from South Korea, and the characters were running around, and then they stopped. They froze. They looked freaked out, scared. And I'm like, what's going on? I didn't have my hearing aid on, so I hear nothing without it, just completely silent. Finally, a moment later, we see somebody at the door. The doorbell rang. You see what a powerful difference it makes, the caption sound, that tell you what's going on. So if anybody wants to see the difference, the power of sound being captioned, you'll want to go to my website to meryl.net side by side. And you'll see a bunch of videos of side-by-side captions. One side is good and one side is bad. And a lot of people have commented they can finally understand why this is a guideline, why this makes a difference. I mean, the smaller things do make a difference. They prevent cognitive overload. They make things just easier to read. It's hard to explain that's what it means to be somebody who depends on them. Just like Viktor was talking about, the skill of people with disabilities in using technology, screen reader, I will never be able to use a screen reader like somebody who uses it all the time. I feel like a first grader. I'm struggling trying to use it because I want to know how it reads the page. And then when Viktor was talking about tapping every paragraph, I'm like, that is so tedious. And I can't understand why so many websites use click here, get more, learn more. They have 10 of them on one page. If you're using a screen reader, you're hearing all the click here, click here, click here, click here. Which one do you want?
I never even realized that. And on that same note of how people with disabilities will have very advanced abilities that other people don't have, Meryl reads lips. And I did not realize until I started connecting with deaf people on LinkedIn that is a skill that many people have because they have had to learn how to read lips because they don't have captions. I know we have a lot of people who are interested in this episode because they want to do better. You know, some of them are live streamers, some of them are making video content, some of them are just blogging and they have images that need alt text. So I'd like you two to take this time to talk to each other and maybe share some tips for anyone out there who wants to just make stuff that's a little bit more accessible than what they were making yesterday.
Well, thank you, Chris. I think, first of all, yeah, I think just really cool example too, Meryl. The screener example you said of click here is a really common mistake. And I have a little training website that I give to our developers that is intentionally the most inaccessible website that I can create. It is just everything that is wrong, I put in there. And that's one of the big ones I do is I just say, click here. And I see if people catch that because it's really common across the web, but it's just like good link content can be crucial. But I was actually also really intrigued by what you're saying with Netflix and Microsoft, because those are both companies I really look up to towards accessibility. Microsoft in particular has had a lot of really cool advances with the Xbox adaptive controller. The packaging that they've worked on has been really good. And also just in terms of really pushing captioning and really, I think they've also put out some advertising showing off and of course trying to talk about their accessibility initiatives. But I think that's just been really cool to see because there are often times in this space that I feel a little disappointed in companies. That there was once a pizza company that I think, Meryl, you know which one I'm thinking of without me naming it, that I remember reading their lawyer's brief and they said, our pizza tracker is far too complicated to make accessible. It's just this innovative thing. It's not possible. And I was like, look, I'm not asking. I don't think, the blind community is looking to understand this delightful animation of a man walking around. I don't think that's the intent. They just want to know where their pizza is. If you started with that is a very simple technical solution that would prevent you from getting sued. And so I think there's a lot of these things to your point, Meryl, it doesn't have to be perfection. Often it's just like even the basics of, can I place an order on this website? Can I understand the status of some information is really missing. And oftentimes even in something I've been really paying attention to is in the government space. There's a lot of new websites that have come out related to COVID of like COVID testing or COVID trackers or anything like that. And you have to ask yourself, well, I can see this content, but would it work for me if I was deaf, if I was blind? Are all of these accessible? And I think there's really some states that are doing a bit better job. I think Governor Pritzker in Illinois has had a sign language interpreter typically at most of his speaking engagements, which is really good to see. But there's a lot of times where they just put out a video of someone talking and it's not captioned. There's not a lot of work put in. And you know that they're the government, so they are very much legally required to. So yeah, I said a bunch of things there, Meryl, but basically I just agree with you and I love everything you said. And especially I actually wrote a bit about Netflix. And I don't know if you've seen Queen's Gambit, which was the chess show, but I wrote about a scene in which they're playing speed chess and they captioned the button click, but they only captioned it once. So it was really hard to tell if you didn't have the audio on when turns were changing because it would be silent and it was off camera. So you didn't see that they were pressing the button. And that was something where I was really intrigued that they did it the first time, but they didn't realize, oh, the click of a button in chess is actually really important. It's a move indicator. So captioning is really interesting because I think there's a lot of choices that you make of what is core information, what adds context, and what's the scene. And you might not add every sound into it if it's just background, but there is an importance to making sure that those critical sounds are there and also that you have the texture of a scene.
It was turn taking, so you pretty much assume it's switched over. I mean, it is possible to overdo it on the sound. For example, what if you're watching a tennis match or a basketball? Thunk, thunk, thunk. Do you really want to see that? Oh, bounce, 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 bounce. Nobody wants to see captions. So those sounds aren't important. People should know. But it's when it's communicating information that can make a difference. I didn't know the doorbell rang. And notice, we're talking here, we're naming companies doing things right, but we're not naming companies doing things wrong. So we are helping those companies doing something right, get their name out there. They did not pay us to say their name. And yeah, we're saying them. I remember somebody gave a presentation at an accessibility conference, and they used that certain pizza company as an example. They had their logo on there. And several of us were talking quietly in private messaging. Can you believe he shared the company's name? Can you believe he's promoting them when they're being sued for not being accessible? And the truth is, if you shift that, and that means putting accessibility into as early as possible in your process, it only adds 1 to 5% to the cost. If you retrofit, if you go back and fix things, it costs a lot more, like 30%. So it's important to build accessibility into your processes. Just like you have a web development process, you create requirements, you refuse a requirement, you create test cases, you test the bug, blah, blah, blah. It's got a process. Well, accessibility needs to be part of that, just like security is a part of it. You would never leave out security because you don't want somebody breaking into people's passwords and so forth. So accessibility is just as critical as security. If you truly care and you want to make a difference, the best thing you can do is have people with disabilities in your company. Of course, I'm not saying go on the street and grab the first person with a disability. Of course, they need to be qualified, but there's so many that are qualified that are not getting the resume seen. That's why I'm wearing this shirt. Nothing without us. Woo, I don't know how tall you can see my shirt.
I can see, that's awesome.
It's based on the phrase, nothing about us without us. And that a lot of marginalized communities say that to mean, okay, if you're talking about caption, you need to have a deaf person involved, okay? But I'm taking out the about us, because nothing without us means you should have us involved all the time. It shouldn't be just when you're talking about that. Because when you bring people with disabilities in your company, they'll find creative solutions that nobody thought of. When I bought my Apple Watch, I bought it for fitness. It turned out to be an amazing accessibility tool, and Apple never promoted it that way. If they had deaf people on their team involved, they might have said, hey, you have an opportunity to reach a market that nobody else is reaching.
Yeah. No, on that note, I want to take a step back just because we're getting advanced here. But if somebody wants captions, is there a program you recommend? I caption my stuff with Adobe. Adobe's captions are fantastic. I always do Adobe's auto captions as a first draft, and they're pretty good. And then I go back and I retool them. Not everybody has Adobe. So are there any programs you can recommend or any best practices? Like, I'm sure some people look at the captions on a screen and they don't even know where to get started. So how would someone get started if they want captions and they haven't been using them previously?
It depends on your video platform. YouTube has a pretty decent system. And one of the things I like about it as someone who's consulted with our marketing team, so I helped make sure that our marketing videos have captions and we have a manual process there, is if you're creating scripted content, it actually has an auto synchronization feature that is super helpful, where you basically upload the script and it makes the job of the algorithm a lot simpler to then sync up. Okay, I know what the words are. Let's just find out where the timings are. But ultimately, I think the important thing is captions as a system are basically a time and a set of words. So it can be a little scary at first, but ultimately, even when you get into the nitty gritty, it really is quite simple. If it's time and words. And I think you can do a lot of work manually. It just can take a bit more time. But usually my recommendation is I really like YouTube system. I don't know if they let you then export that file, which I wish they did so that you could use it with other providers, but that can be really helpful. And one other piece of advice I give is automatic captions, and this is coming from a development perspective, are limited primarily by the quality of the audio that you're feeding into the system. So one of the biggest things that I see is people are like, oh, the automated captions don't work. And I listen to the video and there's a bunch of background noise. The audio quality is quite poor. I'm like, this is just a bad video to start with. No offense. Like if I can't hear the speaker clearly as a human being, how is an automated system going to pick up on that? So if you have a dedicated high quality microphone for your speaker and you make sure that that's what's coming through, the automated captions are going to be orders of magnitude better because it's going to fit with what those systems are trained on. So I think those two things can help a lot because you're going to have improved captions and then you're not going to have to do as much tuning manually. But I think the main thing is you do need the human touch in there. And a lot of times it's the question of, okay, can you either do it yourself, pay a professional? Because I think there is really that professional expertise of knowing what timing is good. And like, I'm sure Meryl has much more advice on how long do you want a set of captions to be that are on screen? Because that can be a mistake, is doing word is not very good, but you also don't want paragraphs. I think that manual skill can be pretty useful.
First you were asking about what Apple tour we like. I'm with Viktor. I use YouTube. I don't rely on automatic captions at all because they don't like my accent. But that's okay. I don't like them either. So it works out. And I find YouTube works really well because I can, if I have a script, if it's a scripted video, I can copy and paste it into YouTube and it can get the timing pretty good. And then I can open up the file in a text editor and fix the line breaks to make them more appropriate. So speaking of lines, you were asking Chris about how long the lines and how many lines. So my recommendation is 1 to 2 lines and no more than 32 characters per line. Now, I don't expect y'all to go counting the characters. Nobody wants to do that. That's too time. You can just use a text editor that's set to 32. That's it. It's that simple. And in the early days, I have an index card with a line on it, and I can just put it up the screen, and it was perfect. It worked beautifully. I just put it up on the screen. Oh, it's too long. But it's not just about getting it right at 32. You want the breaking point to be logical. For example, if you're using somebody's name, like my name, you wouldn't want to put Meryl on the top line and then put Evans on the second line. Names should stay together. So Meryl Evans should be one line. So just something about it that just helps you store the information better. There's no scientific study or anything, but I've watched enough captions, good and bad, to know these little things make such a big difference. And automatic captions are okay if you edit them. Don't just let them go. Edit them. For example, when you post a blog post, do you post it without editing first? Of course not. Who does? Well, maybe some people do, but the posts are probably not very good. And it's the same thing with automatic captions. It's like posting an article without editing them. They are never 100% accurate. Now, as for the best app, I can't give you that suggestion because it depends. I know we hate that answer, but it's true. It depends. For example, let's say you look for a company and they use Adobe already, just like Chris was talking about. Well, try that first. Since you already have it, you might as well try it first. Or maybe you make a lot of videos on your phone. That's going to require a different app than what you use on a computer because they work differently. So the best app depends on your processes and how you do things.
Yeah, no, that is very true. I can say too, as someone on TikTok and Instagram, those have good auto caption features. It's very easy to go edit them right there before you post the video. And to any company who says that they don't have enough time to edit their prospecting videos, I say, how much time did you spend making that video in the first place? You got the camera out, you wrote the script, you recorded it, you uploaded it. What is an extra 2 minutes on the process? It's a drop in the bucket, but it may be the difference between your message getting through or not. And we are about at the end of our time here. So I want to end it there just because I think We have given the audience some food for thought. I want to thank both my guests again. Meryl Evans, deaf author, consultant, speaker, just wonderful person. Thank you for being here. Viktor, you are an amazing guest. I learned so much from you. Keep doing amazing work with Packback and just amazing things. You can find both of their information in the show description here. And thank you very much for joining us today. Say bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris. Bye.